All right, so this is the introduction to the second level of the crypto scavenger hunt hot TED experience. This is now for 2 PPT. And there's just some housekeeping that needs to get taken care of here before we actually can get underway with the hot TED experience. So this particular aspect of the video, it doesn't have the code embedded in it. Rather, it's going to be indicators for which you need to understand the future of this code. So it's hopefully going to help alleviate the first level and make it more solvable for those that have been trying to solve it, because there's not, as of yesterday, there wasn't anybody that actually had solved it. So this should, using this context, I think you should have a lot easier time to go back and solve the first one. Although there is going to be additional aspects to this code. So it's not a perfect reflection, but take this as the better representation of how to solve these maps. Okay, because this is, as I said, a learn as I learn experience to some extent. So this whole crypto scavenger hunt idea is being innovated from the ground up, and I need the feedback loops to understand how best to coordinate this idea to people. So in this level, we're going to be looking at something called spiral dynamics, and it's a psychological theory that was pioneered in the 1960s by a man named Claire W. Graves. We're going to use that theory and we're going to embed it in code in a certain sense. It was to some degree already embedded in code through this kind of color system or schema that was used when he went to apartheid South Africa to help present the code to the people there in a very simplified manner, so that you could translate very complicated ideas to people that didn't have a lot of understanding in that area. And we're going to use that here, although I'm going to try to flesh out in a little bit of detail here in just a short period of time the general concepts. I won't get into the background of Claire W. Graves. You can look in Wikipedia and stuff and see his credentials and that sort of thing. I will just say that it was something of, as close as can be, kind of an empirical landscape of value systems. And how that works is that there's something called like structuralism or whatnot. What you're doing is you're looking at how people make meaning over time. A person named Kohlberg did something like this on moral development, and he noted that there was very distinct patterns that people went through in their moral decision making. So that if your mother was dying, for example, and the absolutely only way that you knew how to save her was to break into a pharmacy next door, would you do it? And there's no other possibilities here. You've reasoned them all out. This is about the only way you can save her. There's some pharmaceuticals that you can break in and get. So the answers go from yes, why, because I want to no, why, because it's against the law, to yes, why, because there are certain kinds of laws, certain kinds of principles that transcend structural laws in place in society. So it comes from sort of egocentric to sociocentric to world-centric in a certain sense, which means that the moral convention grows, and that's a pattern that seems to happen. So Claire W. Graves is doing a similar thing with value systems, and he seems to have found that there's a pattern that has emerged of about 8 to 9 levels of values within society. And the top 3 are emergent. That means there's very few people that are occupying them, but there's still enough to be pretty sure that they're out there. And the top 3, he also noted, it seems to be a fractal or a correspondent pattern sitting atop the previous pattern that has reflections or kinds of similarities to the lower, earlier systems. So I'll get into that a little bit as we go here. So beige is the first level, and it's kind of physiocentric or physiological in nature, very survival oriented. So what matters here? My survival, in essence. And it's really primitive in that this emerged probably a couple 100,000 years ago, it seems, and you don't see it very much anymore, other than maybe in people with some dementia, or in third world countries where they're on their last legs and they need to just get water and food and nothing else really matters to them. maybe they can have fires and certain things, but it's not very complicated in that sense. The next system we've seen emerge about 50,000 years ago, and it's the magic level, which is purple. And what I mean by that, by magic, I mean that, they would wear things like the skin of a bear and think that they imbibe the qualities of that bear, or that they would dance and they think that their dance causes the rain. So it's early causal thinking, and at this time, one example that might be used is that they were starting to recognize things like if you had sex with someone, it would cause birth. Just those kinds of early recognitions of causal elements with your actions. So these people were very hunting and gathering, and what we notice here is that with each new level, there's a biological, psychological, and sociological shift that occurs with it. And what that means is that it sort of solves the problems of the previous system, but adds new kinds of problems as we go. And this is a process that potentially continues forever, so that there's no ceasing to these different value system emergences. But there might be, we don't really know. The next system that occurs is called red, and this is, we see maybe 10,000 years ago, 15,000 years ago, with the emergence of the kind of power gods. And this kind of has this quality of sacrificial, or human sacrifice, animal sacrifice, very might is right, kind of law of the jungle, kind of strongman situation, where they aren't frightened to kill people for further power and such, but they do probably think it's the right thing to do in their mind. But this was, remember, fairly primitive thinking in that sense, although we still see it in gang culture and so forth now. So the next emergent system, and this is often ridiculed in all culture, but it was a great move forward at the time, and that is the religious traditions. This is called blue in his system. So the fourth system, blue, we see an emergence of like this kind of notion of transcendence, of something bigger than oneself, of doing one act for the greater good, or sacrificing yourself now for a greater reward later. And this curbs the impulses of red, which was very impulsive and sexually oriented and sacrificial, and rather, you're sacrificing now for, maybe afterlife or God's smile, or, I'm just suggesting that, the context of this brotherhood that is sociocentric in nature, that is binding a culture together in a way that had never been possible before, was a great move forward in the human trajectory, as it were. And then the next major system that emerged around 1700s, although we see twinklings of it, as far back as like Socrates and Plato, is the rational schema, where logic prevails, and we can potentially build heaven on earth through ingenuity and human reason, and using the brilliance of your mind to craft wonders, and the wanderlust that is associated with that. So the value there is to be a practical thinker that is capable of doing great things for the human social sphere in some sense. And then the next system that emerges occurred around 1960s, and what the recognition here is that the scientific empirical observer, as it were, is not infallible. Rather, they have unique quirks to them that augment potentially their ability to be a rational observer. And so, there's no perfect, as it were, rational observer, in other words. So this relativizes things. It says that, your truth is different from my truth, at least to some degree. And so that's where this whole relativistic meme starts to emerge. And we see information flows in new ways through technology. So the technological mode switches to, computers and this sort of thing. Where the previous orange system was very mechanistic, the green system, or this postmodern system, is very informational and relativistic and multicultural and postmodern. What's emerging now is very interesting in my opinion, because it's the emergence of this idea that all these different systems are important and valuable, and that you can be kind of a chameleon and adapt to the situation. If you're in a blue context, you can appreciate the blueness in you and in them, because it's an important and integral aspect of being in the world. In other words, you yourself had to move through blue when you were about 10 to 15 years old, or maybe even a little younger, and you might not have took it in the way that it was taken 2,000 years ago, believing necessarily in the religious tradition, but the kinds of mind that you were in was very similar to the kind of mind that was adopted 5,000 years ago in the great religious traditions. So in other words, you can appreciate where people are at, and you can make room for that and understand that all of this is part of the landscape of existence. The next system, it might be called the kind of holistic, or really probably integrative. Integrative is the right word for it, and that is this idea that there is potentially this transcendent aspect. So the religious context moves a little bit back in here, and as Don Beck or Claire W. Graves would point out, this might be a reflection on the purple magical system, but at a higher fractal tier. And it seems to really implicate this idea of subtle energies, or that your body doesn't stop at this physical body. There's room for something like a Holy Spirit or God that you're in interplay with, and that you can actually affect things at a distance through your energy body or something like this. Now it gets woo-woo-y, and it's not necessarily very new agey. Really, I think this will be approached very scientifically, because remember, this is emergent in the qualities of taking into account, when done well, of the scientific method, and it's not negating it, it's integrating it. And so what it's going to do is it's going to take into account these very subtle aspects of our being, which is suggested here. It's subtle, but it's inclusive of it in a way that is eventually going to be very scientific. And remember, this hasn't really emerged in a widespread way, so we don't have the context, we don't have the building blocks to really explicate this in the way that it probably will be explicated in the future when it does really fully emerge. And I think it will emerge fairly soon in a way that's quite profound. People like Cliff High says that he has data in his WebBop reports, which is, his reports are very questionable, but this kind of technology might emerge if his web bots really are predictive algorithms of the future to some degree, which is questionable. But it's an interesting side tangent that don't take necessarily Cliff stuff too to heart, but I think that it is an interesting process that he's undergone too in his development of the webbot. Interesting fellow all the same. Anyway, so that's the turquoise or 8th system, and then the 9th system is about the edge of the map, and this is what I would consider coral, or the consolidative controllers, maybe compassionate consolidative controllers. Geopolitics, I think, will come in a big way. Mind mapping, like Elon Musk's Neuralink, that's trying to back engineer the brain. A lot of dangerous territory here. This would be a reflection of red, so again, power is integral to this system, but at a higher order, and control and things like that come back into play, but hopefully it's at a far more enlightened level. But I think that upgrades, both software and hardware, like transhumanist stuff, again, very dangerous territory, will become online with this stuff. And so it's superhumans, kind of superheroes kind of thinking, in my opinion, maybe the ability to kind of fly with upgrades in software and hardware. That's kind of roughly where I think that 9th system is going to go. So I hope that's a brief elaboration on the concepts. You're going to have to use these ideas to flesh out the coding for this particular hot tenting experience. I'm missing out on cutting wood today, I think. I might try to cut a little bit of wood, but stopped in at 7-Eleven to get some wood. Okay, this is the start of level 2. This car right here, it's innovative. Yeah, I'm gonna sit out in some minus 25 weather. Sweet. Blessings to you this upcoming year. So I found a spot to camp just over there. Not a lot of trees around it, but it's all right. Overlooking the river. I only hiked in about half a mile. I'm kind of lazy today. Ooh, pretty cold. This pulk is functioning vastly better than my previous one. It's a little bit longer and it's easier to stack things closer to the ground to keep the center of gravity decent. It hasn't flipped once since I started today. This is the second load, so that's great. There's a fell tree here. It's gonna work as my center pole, I think. Things are looking Millhouse, bros. Falling through here would be straight up life or death. Don't want that to happen. Luckily it's cold. Oh man, it's a mess. It's a mess. Not the most symmetrical setup, this, but we'll see how this goes up. It's the second time I've cut a pole, and I think this one's a touch bit shorter than my last one, but I think it'll still work. Notably smaller. Huh. I think it's alright though. Check it out. Got I didn't have quite enough for all the stakes, so hooked it onto my axe. And because I'm not going to be cutting wood today, this is a pole of sorts. Won't give a lot of. Keeping it creative, bros. Lighters in the cold weather, they won't go, so you have to warm them a little bit before they'll actually start. Just hold them in your hands for about 20 seconds, and usually that's enough. There we go. But will my fire starter log go? Kind of cheating today with wood, with both regular wood, and I brought a couple fire starter logs because I got a late start today. About it's almost 3:30 and night falls at 5:30, so I think this will go. Heat. A basic human need. There's some beer in there that I made from my Pico Brew, a new batch. It's a blonde something, I forget what. Put it in my buddy's Fresh Roots Farms. Troy Stozic has a great farm. It's raw honey, so I just put it in there. Yo. Perhaps it might be a bit early, but I'm gonna get supper started before it gets too dark. What color is this shirt? So something of a practical solution. I've got this new cot. I'm up about 2 feet. That'll keep me hotter, of course, because I'm going to be higher up and heat rises. As well as the last time you could have seen on one of the shots, it was just soaking wet in the morning, and that was from it touching the snow, which was melting because there was heat, but it was still freaking cold on the ground. So this should keep me elevated from the snow as well. It's awesome. Test out the new brew. Nice and cold. Yeah, it's all right. It's not my best. I prefer the darker beers. This is a blonde. It's just a little too bitter for me, I think, but it's all right though. Won't complain. Live in the mystery. I noticed that when I tried to close the front of the tent, it wouldn't quite close properly. It was too far away. I don't know how to explain it easily. When you pull the stakes out, it tightens the edge of the tent, and here I found that it was too tight, too taut, and it was very tough to close. And so I loosened that stake and moved it, but what that did is it pushed this side down. So yeah, it wasn't an ideal spot. I think it's just good enough to make it through the night. Luckily there's no wind, otherwise I'd probably have to find a better place to stake. Unfortunately my feet are probably going to be cold because just by touching there, it's going to keep things cool. Maybe? There we go. Bit of a different lighting system. It's a neat little original candle. The heat isn't strong enough to be a worry, and luckily the pole bends a little bit, so it's I think pretty safe. I'll probably blow it out at night, but bought some On It stuff. Strength and performance. Not that I probably wouldn't normally have this, but it's for pre-workouts. I don't work out. Yeah. Add some water. It'll be my supper time drink. Just gonna throw this as is on the stove. Trying a different boot out this time. It's down-filled, super lightweight. I don't know. It's kind of like a muckluck. Really is warm. Gets a little bit wet, and I got a little bit of a hole, so I'm gonna patch it up. Okay, it's before 6, pitch black outside, so I think I'm gonna have a really early night tonight. Don't feel like staying up too late anyways because hot tenting is very tiring. Got my nightcap. It's like a 20% strong wine, homemade. Let's see how good it is. Try this out. It's a couple years old, so I don't know how good it'll be, but just enough for one glass. Not great. Not bad though. Okay, so tonight's fireside chat, we're going to discuss the higher developmental spheres a little bit. So, if you recall, I talked about the yellow V meme, which was kind of innovative in nature. It's kind of sparked the Silicon Valley growth since like the innovative internet nation started about 1993. And then after that, what I think is emerging pretty soon will be this kind of turquoise landscape with subtle energies and stuff. But I think it'll have a big part to do with virtual reality, where, you know, this notion of like presence allows you to be kind of in two places at once in some sense, where, you know, you're not necessarily bound by your physical space. You can kind of, to some degree, be in two localities at once. Not really, but, you know, kind of. And I think that mindset of being not just here but elsewhere at the same time is very integral to the kind of sparking of a new kind of thinking in some important sense. So as immersion in that space increases, that will go along with it. And then after that, if this is reasonable and it's really pushing the bounds of my ability to kind of reason this, you know, that was kind of cross-paradigmatic thinking. You know, the people that are actually engaged in that space are able to take paradigms, which is like a whole space of thinking in an autonomous way, and integrate them into, you know, meshworks, as it were, so that, you know, the boundaries between different kinds of paradigms can bleed together in kind of a holistic fashion. So, you know, we have, in that sense, a deep ability to not just deal with the chaos of a scattering of fragmented worldviews, but rather, you know, you can find ways to flesh out the art and and bring about a new kind of life to the different world spaces by connecting them in ways that hadn't been done before. And this kind of not only innovative, but creative innovation that's not been landscaped. And again, I think that has to do with this notion that, we aren't just bound by this fleshiness, that we are to some degree expansive beings. And that I think there will be a quality of this reignition of something bigger than oneself, that there's an order to some degree that is a little bit bigger than you and me, that really steps up, in my opinion, in the next wave or system. If this is, now I'm getting really speculative, there's no doubt about that, but it might have, the first spark of this next system, this choral system, might have been seen in people like Philip K. Dick. A little bit wild, a little bit crazy, what you might call the strange Joe, pain Joe, in the sense that he is so out there and was so out there that people thought he was outrightly mad. And you might have some reason to think that that was the case. But he speculated things that, like Valus, vast active living intelligence system, that to some important degree this whole cosmic reality was potentially something like a virtual simulation, and that people like Elon Musk posit this for better and for worse. And I think this gets into really hairy territory. I have really strong feelings in both ways in respect to this, but the idea is that when virtual simulations become so exact that you could actually simulate a perfect casting of the whole nature of things in some important sense. And with exponential trends in technology, it may seem very far off, but the reality is this could be just 10 to 15 years down the line. And the fact that there's trillions of stars in the universe, if not more than that, the idea is that it would be kind of odd to think that another civilization hasn't reached that point before us, potentially. And so this could therefore be very easily a sort of virtual simulation to some important degree. That might not be exactly what Philip K. Dick was hinting at, but in rough, that would be fairly close, I think, if you really fleshed out his thinking. And that's really taken up by people like Elon Musk, where we see indeed things like the neural lace coming online, which would, according to him, be the fourth rind or the fourth brain. So we have this reptilian brainstem and this limbic system and this complex neocortex, which in some sense mimics the reptiles and then the mammals and then the human. There's this potential, he thinks, for a fourth brain through technology. This gets into almost McKinneyan thinking, where the techno-industrial domain is, in important sense, kind of the externalization of our mind, and that through biolace or neural lace or something like that, it is indeed putting that fourth brain into us. And Musk says that we already have that fourth brain through our smartphones and the like, but it's not integrated within us. Hugely controversial territory, but it's something we have to face into, and hopefully we can deal with it in a goodly fashion, despite the fact that there's going to be people that are going to try to be very self-centered about this and manipulate it to their ends. So that's why vigilance seems very important in this time, and understanding these concepts in a deep fashion. The same goes for things like cryptocurrency. This is the monetary realm of the automated ecosystem. So again, there's a great deep aspect in which this is probably going to be manipulated in important respects, where in certain currencies there's a high potential, in fact, that it could be like turned off. Your currency could actually kind of be flipped off. But hopefully those very decentralized currencies through SHA-256, which is the method of encryption that things like Bitcoin uses, that won't be able to be cracked. But even that is possible through quantum computing, and there's people keeping ahead of that through things like quantum resistance in cryptography. And so there's that potential that we might have to navigate to those kinds of waters to keep ahead of the crackers that are trying to manipulate that. And that could be through the deep state or through the shadow government. And it's just something to keep in mind. And I don't want you to be paranoid, but it is important things to think about. Where did money come from? Where is that going? Where is this automation going? The people at high levels, where do they want it to go? Things like that. So I guess that was the gist of what I really wanted to say tonight. Again, it's pretty early. I think I'm going to crash fairly early tonight, but probably stay up for another hour. So all the best.